Okay, so Thomas, Mr. Plaatsman, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to sit with me and discuss the impact of COVID-19 and the coronavirus across, our investees. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a little bit more depth, but obviously we work here together at Lendahand. You're on the investments team, and I think people have heard from you before in regards to co-financing, and you've written a few blog posts for us. So yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for taking the time because I know you guys are super busy right now with everything that's going on.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks for having me. Just a very quick introduction. So I'm Thomas. I work for Lendahand as part of the investment team, and a big part of my time is related to monitoring of the current portfolio. So especially now with the COVID-19 crisis going on worldwide and being in 25 countries, there's quite a lot of work to see what's happening in each and every country and with every investee.
Yeah, and so specifically, I mean, the reason why we wanted to get you on and get your thoughts so that, the crowd can kind of get some form of a boots on the ground update, if you will, with the COVID situation is because so you in your monitoring role, you are the one that works hand in hand the most closely with the companies that we fund on Lendahand.
Hmm.
So once a company gets onboarded and then they actually start raising funds on our platform, you're the guy who they deal with on the monitoring stuff, in the sense of you guys are having emails, you have calls, you have a lot of first hand interactions with people, and I know that since the COVID crisis kind of became so full blown to the point that we were all working from home, um, starting late last month, you've spoken with quite a basically all of our portfolio companies have either spoken to you or someone else from the investments team, and most of them with you. So what we thought was just to kind of first of all just get your general perspective of
Hmm.
what are you hearing from them, because one thing that people need to keep in mind is that all of these situations are so nuanced. Our portfolio companies are across the world, so the situations are going to be different all across the globe. But for you, just in general, as a reaction from the investees who you've been speaking with, what's the general feeling out there from them?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the country and the investee. I guess when COVID-19 sort of hit the Netherlands, uh, we were a little bit surprised, even though it had been going on for a while in China and in other parts of Asia. I think so. I think when that happened and when the measurements were taken in the Netherlands, we very quickly realized that this will probably have an effect on other countries as well, especially Africa, where there weren't a lot of cases back then yet. So one of the first things we did was set up as many calls as possible with our investees to get an idea on what was happening on the ground and how they were preparing for this. I think sort of, yeah, there are quite a few different, I guess, different challenges and things that came up, because we're dealing with, I think, two categories, as you can see on the website, the Lendahand website. So we have the direct deals, which is a lot of renewable energy, off grid, often in Africa, and then we have the financial institutions who are our partners, and then on lend to the actual entrepreneurs and small shop holders or companies. Um, and then I think there's a big difference between the smaller companies and the bigger ones. So what we saw is there are obviously quite a few bigger companies or institutions in our portfolio. So they, in a very early stage, they already had a plan ready. They probably had some sort of measurements for sort of more disaster-like scenarios. Of course, they had to tweak it to the current scenarios, and a lot of companies are still updating that as the situation evolves in different countries. Because at that point, in a lot of African countries, there weren't really any cases, or maybe only a handful. Now there are a lot more. So we tried to check in with them regularly over the course of those weeks, and still do so. I think from the off-grid energy perspective, a big part was the supply from Asia. A lot of systems come from different Asian countries, and some of the factories had been shut down, but quite a few open again. Then it depends a little bit on the country whether they stay open, or as you can see now in Singapore, there are more restrictions again, and that might affect certain suppliers. In country, I think one of the main concerns is obviously the lockdown, not only for the business but also for the people, because in the Netherlands we have a relatively good healthcare system. A lot of people can work from home. That's not the case in every country, and especially not in every rural area. So if there's a lockdown, if sales agents are not able to move and go out into the field to talk to people, to sell, but also to collect payments, because in some areas they have digital payments, like M-Pesa in Kenya. In some areas they don't, or in rural areas people are simply not comfortable enough to use these kind of systems. So I think two challenges there are they able to collect everything? Do people have enough money if they're not able to go out and work, and might get laid off, or might work get paid on a weekly or even daily basis, and just simply don't have a lot of income? And on the other end, are they able to do new sales? And I think it's fair to say that, as a lot of companies in the US have also done, that the sales forecasts are probably going to be much lower than what they initially expected. And I think for the microfinance or financial institutions, it's more about the local entrepreneurs. Are they still able to sell products? Are they, do they get any kind of income? And if not, is there any way to help them there? So I think in some cases, companies these partners are also looking at how to really support these entrepreneurs. So how can they give them additional training and, for example, find grant funding for them to get more help. But on the other hand, I think there's some of these, or a lot of these financial institutions are regulated, and then the local regulator would, so the central bank, for example, would already mention in the news that there would be delays, or that they would allow for, let's say, a 3-month holiday. So not receiving any of those payments and not labeling those as delayed payments. So that put quite a bit of pressure on these financial institutions, because if people hear this in the news, they obviously think that this applies to their loan as well. And I think what most of the partners are doing is really checking in with the customers and seeing whether or not it's necessary to give that holiday, depending on the situation, and if that's caused by COVID-19, or if that's maybe just that they heard it and they applied to it, but it's not necessarily, or it's not necessary at this point in
Yeah.
time.
So let's try to kind of unpack some of that stuff there, because that
Yeah.
was quite a bit. So the first one being, you mentioned the companies that operate with the solar home systems. That's a significant portion of our portfolio. Quite a few of our investors are obviously active in those projects. So I think it might be handy just to explain to people a little bit, how that business model works, which is where so these companies that sell the solar home systems, they have sales forces there in their local countries that who go out and actually sell these systems in the villages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these people mostly work on commission. I guess it's a mix, from company to company, kind of how these employees are paid. But so that's one of the risks that you mentioned early on, is
Yeah.
if there's a lockdown in a country, especially one where we're operating with the solar home systems, if that company is not able to send out their sales force because everyone is under the lockdown, obviously there's limited potential for them to have any revenue, because these aren't companies that are that have like kind of robust e-commerce solutions or anything like that. I mean, they're actually going into rural villages and having to speak with the families and talk to them about the solution and everything like that. So that's one part of that risk factor
Mm-hmm.
for the solar home systems. Did they, kind of give you any just I guess guidance on, because obviously you said that they're talking about lowering revenue
Hmm.
forecasts, as every company in the world is.
Yeah.
So did they give you kind of any feel for how they see that going, just the over time?
Yeah, it depends. I think it's quite difficult to say because some countries are in full lockdown. Only one member of the household is able to leave just to go to the supermarket, whereas there are other countries where there's almost no lockdown yet, and they're still able to continue with operations as normal. But of course, they're aware of the potential for either a full or partial lockdown. So I think.
So then what's the
Mhm.
so kind of how are they maybe prepared to, so in that case, is it basically where they know that they have to be able to incur certain I guess variable cost at the moment, or certain fixed cost at the moment, that they're going to have to continue to pay until they get to the point where they can actually start generating the same revenue that they were used to, pre-COVID. And so it's just kind of a thing of looking at their balance sheets and making sure that companies have enough money in the war chest to be able to get through this period until they can start selling systems again.
Yeah, I think that's mostly it. I mean, if you look at the long run, there's still a huge need for energy, and I think their products are still more relevant than ever. And in some cases, I think initially, because a lot of people were sitting at home, they actually did pay because they need the energy, especially if they have additional appliances, not only light but
Like a
other.
television or
Yeah, for example, that then of course now they would really want to keep that on.
yeah. Right.
So of course that also depends on if they actually do have the money and if they do have the income. Because if not, then obviously that's one of the things that they might not be able to afford. But I think in the long run, they most of these companies are expecting sales to pick up again. Then depending on the company and how, I guess, how risk averse they are, or on their projections, some of them are expecting maybe yeah, a bit of a decrease in sales, or quite a bit of a decrease in sales for the next maybe 3 months. Others are a little bit more conservative and just yeah, for the sake of being conservative, think about a longer period. So, for example, until the end of the year. And indeed, the main concern is making sure there's enough cash in the company so that they will survive this rough period. So then afterwards, they can continue to pick up sales as quickly as possible, and I think continue where they left off. So I think that's the main point now.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, so basically, I mean, the situation for them is not all that different from every situation over here, which is your inflow of cash is about to be quite reduced from what you're used to, and everybody's existing business model, and everybody just has to find some way to kind of bridge that gap, but nobody really knows, of course, like how long that's going to be. Doesn't matter if that's in the US or the Netherlands, or like you said, Singapore. It's just different all over the place. And I think that another one of those questions, I think, early on was, what is the priority, I guess, what's the prioritization going to be of electricity and your appliances for a family in rural sub-Saharan Africa? um, and I think it's interesting that you say that, when you're stuck at home now and you can't go anywhere, that all of a sudden, maybe the electricity, as far as like your light bulbs and your television set, if you have one, that might have been lower down on the priority list before. But now, because you can't actually drive your motorbike anywhere, or you can't, take your car, you can't do any of these kind of things that you would normally do, all of a sudden you have less money that you're spending on other things. You're not out working in the
Mhm.
field at the moment, so you don't have to pay to get a wheelbarrow or something like that. So it's kind of like, now it is interesting if maybe they are seeing that the demand is at least staying fairly consistent, because of, like you say, you're stuck at home. So having electricity in your home now is much more important than before, when you might be out all day.
Yeah, I do think that really depends on on the effects on their end clients. And I think it also really depends on the country, because in some countries, a lot of the clients in rural areas are farmers, and there's still a need for food, and especially if there's a harvest, an upcoming harvest, then they will probably get this money inflow and will be able to repay. But if they're day workers and all of a sudden they're not allowed to move because their work is deemed non-essential for the time being, then it has much um, yeah many more severe implications. So I think it's also important to realize that a lot of these companies, and especially the end customers, whether it's someone that needs the energy or someone that needs a loan for their shop, um, I think, not to downplay the situation in the Netherlands, but I think are very severely impacted as long as these lockdowns continue. And I think a lot of these companies and partners are trying to be as flexible as possible to support these people. In some cases, it's really, I think for example, in India, some of the people, some of the end clients managed to get above basically the poverty line, and then a crisis like this could actually plummet them back into poverty. So they're also very active in, I think, in the first place, to see how are people and clients and companies dealing with this, because the main concern is not necessarily the cash position, but to make sure that all these people survive. And then I think, of course, secondly, you need to make sure that you have enough cash in the company and that the company will be operational, because otherwise you don't have a long-term effect.
Right. Yeah, but and it's not that I'm trying to say that any of this stuff, of course, like is certain, but it's what I find interesting because
Mm-hmm.
I think people out there, I guess, watching this don't know, but I don't have nearly as much exposure to this stuff as you do. So when we do things like this, I get to learn quite a bit
Yeah.
from you. And it's just interesting that I notice it. It sounds a lot that's similar to when you hear somebody on CNBC talking about European and North American businesses. It's just that there is still so much uncertainty, and then people are just kind of doing the best that they can to kind of navigate through this in a smart way. And so it sounds like what you guys are doing is just the key there is that open communication in real time between you and the investees, our partner companies, so that you can stay on top of these situations and that they can give you updates of well, it looks like our lockdown is not going to be that severe, or our lockdown may be very long, which means
Yeah.
that we think this effect could happen. So we're still in the early days, it seems. But good to know that, you have that kind of ongoing open dialogue with them. And so the second thing that you mentioned earlier, you pivoted to financial institutions, and just again, so we talked about the solar home companies, which are usually direct investments, of course, on our
Mm-hmm.
platform. So you have to have this one-to-one discussion with the companies themselves. But with the financial institution, it's different, because normally it's a financial institution is lending to, say, an entrepreneur who wants to like start offering a new crop in a field or something like that. And so this is kind of you're now one step removed from that person, because you deal with the financial institution and not
Mm-hmm.
the end borrower. But that situation is a little bit different, because now it's not about the company being able to make sales. It's about whether or not these people can make the repayments back to the financial institution. So you kind of started to touch on the specifics about that situation. Could you explain that a little bit now here?
Yeah. I think just before I start on the financial institutions, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the pay-go, so off-grid solar companies, sell on credit. So the clients pay part of it upfront, but then the rest is still, for example, monthly installments. So in that sense, they're also waiting. So they have two parts. One is the new sales, and one is the repayments from existing clients. And then for financial institutions, I think. So yeah, it's mostly. I mean, they use the money to then on lend that to, depending on the area and what the financial institution is involved with. But for example, shop holders or small businesses in that country. And I think from our calls with them, the main focus, because of course it's difficult, especially for large microfinance institutions that have thousands of clients potentially, to get an idea of each single individual and if they're able to repay. So in that case, we normally try to get some information from them on, we know what sectors they're active in. So they normally tell us how those sectors have been affected and what part or what percentage that is of the total portfolio. So when you think of, in some of the Asian countries like Cambodia, you have, and I guess in every country, tourism is heavily affected. So if they
Mhm.
have a large part in tourism, there's a big chance that they don't get any income, and will be more difficult. But in terms of, for example, rural farmers, they might be able to repay as sort of as they used to do. So I think that's one key area, and then the other part is just trying to get a view on basically what percentage of their portfolio is having issues. Is this related to COVID-19, or is it just that they heard that they might get a delay on repayment, so they just try to get this? Because obviously that will be beneficial even if you're not in severe problems.
Yeah, and who's
So
not gonna take that if you get the chance, I
yeah,
mean,
exactly,
it's the
and
same with, like, the stimulus stuff here where, it's not like the government's gonna offer to give you 1,000 euros and you're gonna say, "Ah, no, I
yeah,
don't
no,
need it."
exactly. So yeah, so I think it's mostly that. So they need to see what's being what they have to offer, um, and depending on the sector and the entrepreneur, if they actually need it, and do a quick check on that.
Okay, cool. And then so it sounds like you guys the main thing for you is just trying to get out in front of it and just trying to make sure that there's no surprises. So you're just trying to kind of make sure that that information flow is there, making sure that whenever they know something, you know something, just to kind of make sure that that you're always informed every step of the way.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the key things has been the transparency. So trying to talk to everyone in an early stage, and to tell them that we're also there to support them, and of course we're also limited to a limited set of tools. But as much as possible, we're trying to think along and see how we can assist and what would be best for the company at this point. Because obviously we're an impact investor. A big part of what we're trying to do is to create an impact, and then offer a return on that. So yeah, so it's two things. It's the impact and making sure that the company survives, and then afterwards picks things up and starts or keeps growing again. So yeah, so I think it's the transparency, and then getting frequent updates from them, because I think it's important to realize that at this point no one really knows. Of course, there are a lot of rumors, and we keep track of the news, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. So it's trying to get those frequent updates, and once there are major changes, to have a sort of a short line between investee and us, and to make sure that we fairly quickly hear about that, and then see how we can can
Hmm.
take it from there.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with Daniel, who is our he's he joined the company about 3 months ago, and he is going to be our CFO once he gets approved by AFM. And so, but he works on the investments team alongside you guys as well. And so he brought up we were talking about that balance of impact, putting the impact in the impact
Yeah.
investing thing, and we discussed how you and Tobias have such a lengthy history of volunteering and the different causes that you guys have kind of been involved in, and every single one of you guys have been to multiple of our partner companies. You and I have both seen the solar home companies in person in Africa.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the things that people might be surprised by is just how similar the situation there is to here, in the sense of business is business. Kind of it's kind of like these a lot of these companies weren't exactly started with a lot of extra money, of course,
Mhm.
right? So a lot of their operations are very lean to begin with, and that's a huge advantage at this moment, because if they were a lot of companies, startups here in the Netherlands, also in the US, it's like once they get some funding, they're just so loose with it, and then all of a sudden they have
Mhm.
these super nice offices and everybody has a, $5,000 computer. But these companies aren't in those situations, right? They've always had to bootstrap, in the sense of trying to be efficient with their capital. And that's really helping them out, it seems, at this moment. But and I think it's an unfair expectation to think these companies would have so many answers about COVID when companies, here have zero answers as
Yeah.
well. We're all just trying to kind of, do what we can. But interesting to just to hear that the same they're dealing with the same issues that, every company is basically dealing with right now. And it sounds at least like they're, trying to be pretty proactive and get ahead of it, and just keep whatever control that they can.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you look at the US right now, and there are a lot of big companies, same in Europe, that are getting funds from, for example, government funds and support because of the current crisis. And I don't think of course, it depends on the country, but yeah, in general, I don't think we can expect a startup or a scale up um, in this market to just be completely healthy and continue with sales as expected. When there's a lockdown, and especially if you compare that to even in the US or in Europe, that a lot of companies have problems just because people cannot go outside of their house, or um, you know, continue to buy things, or pay.
And it's just, I think it's really, personally, I think it's really nice to hear you when you talk about that partnership with the investees, because obviously it is your guys' job to build the portfolio so that Lendahand investors, our crowd, have investments that they can, choose from. But then what makes us different as an impact investing company, rather than just, all about the profit, would be that, yeah, we do see ourselves as a partner for these companies, as somebody to help them in times like this, to try to, navigate these situations as best, as we can. And do you feel that the spirit of that partnership, very strong and alive and well, at this time during COVID, as you're working with all these different companies?
Yeah, I think in general, I would say yes. I think I mean, it's, we're in this situation together, and I think it's a good opportunity to really build on this partnership and to make sure that we show our support. I think at the same time, as a lot of investors probably have seen, the risk in the market is higher than before. The interest rates that we're offering now on the platform are slightly higher than before. Of course, not every company is, a lot of companies understand this. I guess there are mixed feelings. You never want to pay more, but at the same time, it has to reflect the risk on these projects. So I think in general, our openness and willingness to help is really being appreciated. At the same time, of course, some investees would like us to do more, but we also have limited resources. We're also a for-profit company ourselves. We don't have grants and pots of money or funds that we can simply utilize to help them through this rough period. So I think in general, yeah, our transparency and just being honest about what we can offer and what we're willing to help with is really being appreciated. At the same time, obviously, some of the companies would like us to do even more, but in some cases, that's just not possible.
And so sorry, when you say when they want us to do more, do you mean they would like to be able to raise more money, or do different measures? What does that mean specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also really depends on the investee and their relationships. Some investees are work with a lot of professional lenders, and we're just another lender to them. I think some of the smaller companies, they might get a lot of grant funding in, and I think in general, grant funding has a different purpose and is often used in an early stage to help the company or to help them in certain side projects that would then help them to continue or advance later on. So I think in some cases, they were probably hoping that we would be able to offer any kind of grant funding, or instead of the normal projects, to have some sort of free disaster fund. And I know that there's these disaster funds, or very low interest long-term loans being set up, but I don't think we're in the position where we as a sole lender can do that, and we don't really see that, or at least not now. You don't see that on an individual basis from other impact investors in general. So I think it's more, I think going forward, there will be more of these funds that they would be able to apply to. And what we would like to do is, if we know of any of these funds, and if we think that these could be helpful to any of the investees, to make sure to link them to those funds and to help them with applying for that. but yeah, in that sense, I think we have to communicate what we are capable of doing, um, and I think in general that's being appreciated. But of course, it's a difficult situation. So
Yeah, and
industries would.
yeah, I can
Mhm.
definitely see it from their side as well, where it's if you're, on behalf of your own company, you have to do everything that you can in a moment like this to get any resource that you can possibly, tap into to prevent any
Yeah,
unforeseen,
yeah.
consequences. So I just want to basically close out with this, which is there anything that you can recommend people do if they're, interested? They want to kind of keep up to date on the situation, more than I guess the communications that we can provide. But do you recommend that they just, keep tabs on the individual countries where they have their investments and just kind of, monitor the situation there? Is there anything that you can give people as just guidance for what they can pay attention to?
Yeah, that's actually quite a difficult question. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, right now we're really on top of things and talking to a lot of the investees frequently. I think it's helpful to have these kind of podcasts and newsletters, and to give more updates on the situation, because obviously it's more difficult if you're not um, talking to these investees on a daily basis. Yeah, apart from that, obviously, like it depends per country, and it helps to know what's happening in the country. At the same time, we're working in so many countries, and um, I don't know how. I guess it depends on the individual investor. I think some investors would like to know more, and of course, you have lots of financial newspapers and updates on the situation, COVID-19 dashboards to track what's happening and what the economic effects are. At the same time, it's a lot to track, so I can imagine that not every person would like to constantly be thinking about all these different countries and on a weekly or daily basis follow what's happening.
Yeah, nobody wants your life, is what you're saying. Yep. No, well, thanks a lot for yeah for detailing that, and thanks for taking the time just to sit and kind of explain what you've been up to and what you've been trying to find out and what you've heard from people. You're doing great work, so
Thanks.
keep it up, all of you guys over there on the investments team. Well, cool. Thanks, Thomas. We'll look forward to
Thank you.
speaking with you about this again soon because obviously things are going to continue to develop. And so we'll try to, sit down for another one of these whenever we feel like there's some, more content
Yeah.
to kind of give people a legitimate update and we'll also continue with newsletters and emails and things like that. But really good to sit down and get your perspective. So thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Happy to help out.
All right. Talk to you later, Thomas.
Bye bye.